Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. There is a saying from Tibetan Buddhism, as it is viewed, so it appears. This is a teaching that has to do with the nature of perception. We've spoken about perception before and the critical importance of understanding how that works. The world we experience is, in the last resort, is a concoction of the quality of the attribute of perception, of sanya. We receive signals from the outside world via the senses, and then the mind creates a simulation that we actually experience as an approximation to reality, that we can never directly know the ultimate nature, the real nature of the existent universe. What we experience is filtered through the senses and then parsed or manifested, manipulated by perception to give us the gestalt experience of a world. One way this plays out is the experience of the world that we have can be quite different depending on our state of mind. We see that, for example, in the people who come here to Arrow River, where the conditions are on the rustic side and we're in the forest. And you get some people who just love that, who really find the experience of getting back to the earth, getting back to nature very enriching and enjoyable. And you get some people who is just horrendous, horrible, to have to be in a cabin with no power, no running water, poop in a toilet. It's just really a hole in the ground. And then there's mosquitoes, and it's cold, having to deal with weather conditions. And with some people, the danger of wild animals is exaggerated to become enough to make it impossible for them to stay. We've seen that on a couple of occasions. Likewise, I just came back from a week in New York City, and the experience of being in a big city is either exciting and invigorating and so many things to see and do and all the variety, or else it's completely oppressive. It's so crowded, so noisy, pollution, how can anyone take this? And this is all a question of perception, how we experience our circumstances, what we focus on. There's a story in the Jataka tales about the Naga kingdom. There's actually many stories about Nagas in the Jataka tales, and one of the recurring motifs is a virtuous human being taken by the Nagas as a reward. He's taken down to the Naga kingdom and allowed to enjoy the pleasures of the Naga realm. And for example, he saved the Naga from a snake charmer, so he's taken down to the Naga kingdom and given a palace to live in, and the Naga king gives him 500 of his wives to serve as handmaidens, and he has all the rich food and everything else. And with some variations, this story occurs a few times in the Jataka tales, and the usual course of events is that after 100 years, the human grows weary of sense pleasures. He's satiated, and he wants to return to the human world and become an ascetic and follow a spiritual path. And the Naga King gives him permission and he leaves. There's one interesting variation on this, is that in one story there's a kind of a scoundrel, a con man type character who convinces the Nagas that he's virtuous to get a chance to enjoy the Naga realm, and they take him down to the Naga realm, but because of his lack of merit, he perceives the Naga palace as a dismal prison, and the food as coarse, foul fodder, and the Naga maidens as ugly, horrible yakinis, yaka women. So he is unable to enjoy any of the pleasures. Now, reality in those realms is more fluid than it is in our realm, but it's the same principle applies. We suffer or we enjoy our circumstances in large part due to our mental attitude. As far as pleasure and pain go, it's significant that in the Abhidhamma it's taught that of the five physical senses, only the sense of touch experiences pleasure and pain directly. The other senses, sights, hearing, smell, and taste, perceive things as pleasant or unpleasant only through the mediation of the mind. And then it's the mind sense that actually experiences pleasure or pain, pleasant or unpleasant. Now we have this saying in English that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And this is the nature of those senses. Like the physical sense of touch, we do experience pain directly, or if you step on a thorn or a hot coal, you will experience pain. And if you feel a cool breeze on a hot day, it feels like pleasure on the body. This is directly mediated by the sense of touch, knows pleasure and pain, but the other senses do not. There's no sight or sound or anything which is intrinsically pleasant or unpleasant. This was something that Kema Ananda was very skillful at teaching. He would often try and flip people's perceptions just so they could see that their perception is not the ultimate reality. There was one occasion when we were doing some work here, cleaning up the property, and I was working with Kema. We worked, a couple of hours in the morning, and then we stopped for a coffee break, and we're sitting in his cabin drinking coffee, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm kind of thinking ahead of what I'm going to do after coffee break. And there was a pile of old firewood, old hunks of poplar that had gone rotten. They were no good for firewood anymore, a small pile of them. And I said, I think I'll get the cart and haul those ugly old pieces of poplar off in the bush and dump them. And Kema says, how can you call them ugly? He says, I find every phase of the life of wood, from the growing tree to the cut pieces, I find them all beautiful, even down to where they're going rotten. See how they're all these different colors, and there's these fungus growing out of them. And he had me tripping out on how beautiful these rotten pieces of poplar were. So when we went back to work, I just left them. So I thought, now this is like a feature, not this is like... And after another couple hours, he says to me, hey, I thought you were going to get rid of those goddamn ugly bits of poplar. And he did this sort of thing often, to flip people's perception. So it is possible to do that if you find yourself in circumstances that you find unpleasant, to look for something, look for another side to it. This is related to something Ajahn Punnadhammo often said, that I found one of the short, pithy things the most useful over the years is, if you can't get out of it, get into it. if there's some task that you find unpleasant or some unavoidable circumstances you have to deal with, if you throw yourself into it and try to really put your heart and soul into it, then you're making the most of the circumstance, and you might find yourself actually starting to enjoy it. Now, what I'm speaking about here, we need to have a caution. We're not talking about putting on rose-colored glasses and ignoring reality. This is subtly different. For an example of that, you recall that Monty Python movie, Life of Brian. If you've seen that, there's a crucifixion scene near the end where they're all crucified up on the crosses, and Brian is moaning and groaning, and the guy on the cross next to him says, "Cheer up, Brian. Look on the bright side of life." They start singing this song, "Look on the bright side of life." It's not a question of ignoring reality. We should remember that as far as feeling tones or feeling attitudes go, joy is positive, but equanimity is higher than joy. Equanimity is spiritually higher than joy, although you could say they're both generally positive. And equanimity is seeing things in their own nature as they actually are. This is the highest way of seeing circumstances. It's not focusing on the unpleasant or the pleasant, but just taking them in their own nature as this is an actual reality. This means, in particular, seeing the three characteristics in phenomena, seeing them as impermanent, imperfect, unsatisfactory, and as empty or not self, void of an intrinsic substance. Seeing things as imbued with the three characteristics is very liberating, and it frees us from bondage to the pleasant and unpleasant, to pleasure and pain, which is the kind of the carrot and the stick of existence, of mundane existence. If we see things in their own nature as they actually are, we realize that all conditions, from the most painful to the most gloriously pleasant, are impermanent and changeable. And this is a key insight that is very helpful for getting through life. When the unpleasant circumstances are upon us, then knowing that they're impermanent is a huge benefit. A lot of times you're experiencing some kind of painful circumstance, physical pain or emotional pain. What might make it seem to be unbearable is the mind running ahead and saying, "Oh, I can't bear this," and you're imagining this going on and on. But the reality is you can bear anything for one moment, and it's only one moment that you have to bear, one moment at a time. And knowing that each moment is just an intrinsic, discrete unit, and all you have to deal with is one moment, then it becomes bearable. This is one of the wonderful things, is it also allows a person to fully enjoy the pleasant experiences. If you know from the outset that it's impermanent and imperfect and essentially empty, then you can enjoy it for its own intrinsic quality for this moment. Now, this moment is pleasant and I'm enjoying it, and I don't have to spoil that by thinking, "Oh well, this is not going to last." you know that it's not going to last. You just focus on the present moment and take it as it is. We do this all the time, so spoil our pleasant experiences by either expecting them to last or expecting them to be better, expecting perfection. And there's no perfection in samsara. There are pleasant moments, and we can enjoy the pleasant moment without being attached to it or craving it or wishing it to continue. I recall reading a little book by Alan Watts, who was kind of a hippie Zen character of the 60s, and he spent a few pages in this book criticizing Theravada Buddhism as being negative and focusing too much on suffering and life denying and all this kind of stuff. But he was honest enough to include a caveat in a footnote. He said, on the other hand, I have traveled extensively in Southeast Asia, and I've never seen such happy people. And, there is something to that. When you accept the reality of samsara, then you don't feel cheated all the time. You don't feel disappointed with what's to offer. It's just, if something pleasant, good comes along, then you enjoy it in its own terms. And you're able to be happy in the moment. Very often our perception of things is very partial, selective. This is most evident in the case of sensual desire, sexual attraction to an attractive member of the opposite sex is, in the words of the Visuddhimagga, it's due to focusing on the signs and particulars. When we see an attractive person, attractive woman, we don't see the totality of the physical form. We focus on certain features, the signs and particulars that are considered beautiful or pleasant to look at. We don't focus on things like nose hair and snot and blood and pus. This is where the meditation on the 32 parts of the body is meant to counterbalance that with a different perception of the body. And we're considering the body in that meditation in its intrinsic reality as a three-dimensional form. It's a skin bag holding all these kind of weird, oddly shaped organs and filled with various unpleasant smelling fluids, and this is deliberately playing with this quality of perception to see the body in a different way. So we can, with practice and with deliberate effort, we can shift our perceptions. Now, this is another quality of Sanya, is that it's educable. It's not fixed. We can shift our perceptions. A little exercise you can do if you find yourself somewhere and you're seeing something you consider ugly, like passing by a junkyard or some derelict building, or and if your immediate impulse is to see this as ugly, then try and find the beautiful in it. Try and look at it and try to shift your perception. Focus on the shape or the color or whatever, and there's no real reason to do it other than as an experiment, to see for yourself how perception is changeable, how you can perceive things in different ways by focusing on different aspects, different signs and particulars. And to reiterate, the critical point is that the ultimate perception is to see things as far as we can in their ultimate nature as they actually are, to perceive things according to the three characteristics, to see them as dependently arisen, and to see them as imperfect formations. And this kind of perception this is the eye of wisdom. This is clear seeing that we call vipassana. This allows the mind to eventually break the bonds of conditionality altogether. This is the way out. Yeah. But as long as we're dealing with conditionality, with conditioned formations, we might as well work with them as skillfully as we can. Another tenet of Abhidhamma is that unpleasant feeling is never associated with a skillful mind state. This is a very interesting thing to contemplate and to work with. The three feeling tones, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, can be cross-referenced with the mind states as being skillful or unskillful. And joyful and equanimous states can be either skillful or unskillful depending on object and depending on circumstance, but unpleasant feeling is always associated with unskillful mind states. So as a general rule of thumb, if you're feeling miserable, you're doing something wrong. You're missing it somehow. You have to be a little bit careful with that teaching, because I have found some people then hear that and they feel guilty for being miserable, and then they feel more miserable. Pile it on and feel guilty about it. Also remember that until you are an arahant, you will have unskillful mind states from time to time. That you're not going to be beyond that short of arahata. But the skillful practice is to try and first of all to recognize when you have succumbed to an unskillful state, to recognize that as such. And the second skillful action is to try and minimize those states. This is the definition of right effort, the four right efforts to arouse those skillful states that are not present, to cultivate, nourish, and increase those skillful states that are present, to diminish and minimize those unskillful states that are present, and to not allow new unskillful states to arise. Those are the four right efforts. So these are a few thoughts about the nature of perception and working with perception. It's really something that is very central to our practice, and it's important for us to understand how perception works and to see the ways we can work with perception to our benefit, for our welfare and happiness.
Antamayam Dhamma Kataya Sadhu Karam Dharamase Sadhu Sadhu